Okay, so I'll share my screen now. Chat. Okay. So before we get into, oh yeah, and by the way, I mentioned earlier to Jesse, but the README for this lesson is on the GitHub curriculum for Code Platoon. You can find it under optional lessons if you pulled it in the last few days. I would recommend looking at it. It will follow it roughly, but it has the commands for like setting things up, which I'll go through, but it's probably going to be easiest to copy and paste them from that lecture instead of trying to copy what I'm typing on screen. So first, I want to discuss what Tailwind is and why we're even using it. So if we're thinking about our front ends and trying to make them look visually nice, we have a few different options. The first and most basic would just be to use plain CSS, which we've talked about before, but we all know that that can get messy. You have separate CSS files, you have lots of different class names, and you're constantly jumping back and forth between CSS and HTML. I think we've also had the experience, pretty much all of us, that you apply some property to some class in your CSS file, you apply that class to the element, and then that property does not appear on screen. And we don't know which of the many CSS cascade and specificity and proximity and all sorts of different rules for which properties get applied caused this property to not actually end up being visualized on screen. So that can be a frustrating experience. Some other options we have for our front ends are component libraries like Materials UI or Bootstrap. And I know a lot of you will be utilizing those, and those are good options. But personally, I've found with those, I often feel like I'm fighting the framework in a sense, and they sometimes have less customizability options where you kind of get a distinct look of websites with those frameworks. People who've used Bootstrap can pretty easily see that a site has been built with Bootstrap if they're familiar enough with the framework. So there's less versatility with those and less flexibility that you're sort of locked into what Bootstrap has already made. Nonetheless, great framework. And many of you will probably use it. So I just wanted today to present another alternative, which is called Tailwind CSS. So Tailwind is a CSS framework that is not a component library. So it doesn't provide a set of pre-built components for you to use, but it instead provides an easier way of applying plain CSS properties. So it's much more flexible simply because it's just an easier method of using plain CSS. So if we want to get into to see what it is, we first sort of have to look at in person, like actually in code, look at what the issues with plain CSS are. So real quickly, I am just going to make an HTML file here on my screen, and I just want to make a quick project utilizing plain CSS. So first, I'm going to make an index.html and a styles.css. And in my index.html, I'm going to have doc type HTML. I'll have HTML. And then I'm just going to put in my header, a link tag to the CSS styles.css. All right. And then in my body is where our content is going to go. So, oh yeah, if you guys want me to use dark mode, let me know now and I can switch over.
No, keep it, please.
Eric, you're in the minority. All right. Well, we'll continue with light mode. Okay, so in our body, let's say we're making like a to-do list app. Maybe we have a header that's like my to-dos. And then I'm going to have a div that's going to contain all of the lists. Maybe I have a list like pick up groceries and div containing its elements, milk, juice, right? Maybe I have another list here. Homework, assignments. All right, so we have a simple to-do list here, which is hard-coded in our HTML. And if we want to view this, I can run live server. All right, and then I go to Chrome here and I copy a link. We can see our just basic HTML site. And this gives us the plain CSS that is applied automatically by the browser. So if we want to style this a little bit, then we got to look at our styles.css file. So I'm going to try and make this look a little bit more like a to-do list by styling the header, my to-dos a little bit, and then styling the sub-list headers, the H2s here and here a little bit, and giving it some backgrounds to make it look a little bit nicer. So to do that, I can target elements with a specifier, such as H1, and we can apply a variety of properties. Just copy some in here. All right. And maybe I want to make my H2s blue. And I want to make my divs background color a gray color. This way you can distinguish between the different lists by giving them a background color. So if I save this and I go back to my file, we can see our styling has applied here. However, I wanted a gray background color on each individual list. So I wanted to target each individual div that was part of the list. However, because I only targeted div, it also targeted this larger encasing div here that encases both of the lists. And that's why we can see here the entire block is highlighted in gray instead of an individual list. So if I wanted to fix that, we would have to make a class for these divs. And what name should we use? Like we can come up with some semantic naming, like this is a list div container. And its class name is to state what HTML element we're trying to target. What it semantically means is what we're doing with this class name list div container. So if I go to styles.css, I can then target that class. And then here it's fixed. So this was trying to give an example of the normal workflow. So just in a little bit of time here with a very simple project, we're hopping between styles.css and index.html a lot, which isn't necessarily too bad, but with a larger project, it becomes very easy to forget what styling applies to what, and having to constantly jump back between these files in a larger project can become a headache. Additionally, having to name these semantically important classes, in this case, it was easy to come up with a name like list div container, But I think you can imagine if you have layers and layers and layers of nested HTML components with divs all the way down, it's tough to know what list div container even means anymore. And when you have like 100 of these different semantic class names, it becomes quite confusing to work with. So the approach Tailwind does is it sort of flips around how we're thinking about CSS classes. Instead of using selectors to apply all of the styles for a certain type of element, instead it uses class names like text blue, and then just does color blue. And maybe it does text red and then color red. So the point is, Tailwind just makes a lot of classes that apply just one property with one value. So by switching this perspective on how we're treating CSS classes, we can go back here, and if I wanted to give these P elements different colors, I don't have to write like green P element and then style a green P element. Instead, what I do is I just go text green. So now the class doesn't represent all the styles of what we're trying to build, but instead one style. And we just apply that one style to the elements as needed. And because these styles are okay, we're not going to anything here. I wonder why that is occurring. Oh, I need periods so that these are classes. Exactly. Now we get our colors. Okay, so because these classes are named such that we instantly know what text screen is doing, it's just applying green text and that's it. We don't have to look back at the CSS file. It's pretty obvious what it's doing. So we can essentially pre-write all of these CSS property and value pairs in the styles.css class, and then never care about this file ever again and just apply them one by one. So if I had written them for all of the property and value pairs, and I wanted a bunch of other styles, I could go like font bold, and maybe this is a flex box and it's a flex row, and we want wrapping. Like I would just apply all of these styles in line because I would have pre-written all of the classes to refer to CSS property and value pair in my styles.css file. Of course, there are many CSS properties and values, so that would lead to thousands of different classes if we did it like that. So typing it out would be a pain. But what Tailwind is it's essentially just a library of all of those classes. So Tailwind just provides 1,000+ classes that all refer to CSS property and value pairings that you apply in line by writing the class for the element. All right. So if we want to see Tailwind in action and get some practice with it, first I want to talk about how we install Tailwind in a Vite and React project. The Tailwind official documentation is quite good and leads you through installation for all sorts of different projects. So it's not just for Vite bootstrapped React projects, but that's what we're using in Code Platoon. So I'm going to talk about that now. If I go to my terminal here, I can create a new Vite project. All right. All right. Yeah. Install. What is this saying? Oh, I need to see lesson, then install. Perfect. Okay. So now I've installed and I've created a new Vite project. We've all seen this, but to make Tailwind work in our project is we need to run two, but essentially there's only two steps. So it's very quick. The first is to use another npm install command and then an npx init command. I'll paste those two in the chat if anyone's following along. It's also on the README. So I'm just going to run npm install -d tailwind css host css auto prefixer. And then I'm going to run npx tailwind css init -p. And what that did is it essentially installed Tailwind into our npm project, and then it created this Tailwind config file, also this post CSS file, but we won't be touching that. For our Tailwind file, we then have some configuration settings, which can be used for essentially working with more complicated Tailwind features. But for now, all we want to put into that is we want to add 2 lines to the content array here, which are index. I'll put those in the chat if anyone's following along again. We want to put these 2 lines into content. So what this says is Tailwind looks for any file with a JS or JSX extension and then applies, essentially reads those files, looks at which Tailwind classes you've used, and then is going to apply the appropriate styling. All right, so that's how Tailwind knows which files it's actually trying to style. As far as our project goes, I'm first going to get rid of the references to SVGs. I'm going to get rid of app.css. I'm going to get rid of the references to SVGs and React.css here. And then I'm going to delete everything inside of index.css, but I want to keep the index.css file because the third and final step of setting up Tailwind is to paste in these 3 lines into index.css. And it does not interpret it. If we use Tailwind CSS as our interpreter, it understands what this is saying. Okay. Let's go with Tailwind lesson here, and then let's get rid of the SVG reference once again. Okay, so now we have everything in our Vite project all up and running, and Tailwind is installed. So if I go back to my HTML file, I'm going to add in this code into our app. So we get the same start here. And then what I'm going to do is get rid of these classes. This we're going to use Tailwind instead. And then if I npm Vite, actually it's npm run dev. And then we go to our local host at the appropriate port. We can see that we have the same site's content. Now you'll see that this actually doesn't look the same as base HTML does. And that's because Tailwind provides something called the normalized.css, which is a file that just strips out all of the browser's default styling. And why would you want that? Because usually the default styling can complicate things later on or leads to just things you generally wouldn't want. So for example, on this page here, if we look at the body, the default styling for the body is to give it a margin. So we can see in orange, the body is not flush to the sides of actual page. And we can easily change that with CSS ourselves, but a normalized.css file will usually just, it's a pre-written file that's going to strip out all of this generally unnecessary styling that the browser does by default because we want to style our site ourselves. And so that's why right now it looks very, everything looks the same. You can't really tell a P versus an H2 versus an H1, but soon enough we will be able to with Tailwind. All right, back to VS Code. Before we continue onward, I want to recommend two VS Code extension installations here. First is Tailwind CSS IntelliSense. This one is made by Tailwind Labs itself, so this is their official Tailwind extension. Highly recommend installing this one. It's practically required for Tailwind development. And we'll see why in a second. It basically gives you autocomplete with Tailwind classes. And then the second one is going to be something called Tailwind Fold. Major criticism of Tailwind is that when you have lots of classes applied in line to every element, it can get really messy really quick and very cramped. So what Tailwind Fold does is, we see, hard to see in the small screenshot here, but on the right screenshot, it essentially takes these long lists of classes and puts them into a little icon that you can then click on to see them and reveal them as needed. So it just cleans up the screen when you're not actually worrying about your Tailwind code. So with that said, we can now begin really using Tailwind. So if we wanted to make the site look roughly the same with Tailwind, we can apply its classes in line. So for example, if we look back here, my H1, I wanted font weight bold, underlined text, and 3-pixel underline. I can do that in line. We'll say class name equals, and it's class name, not class, because we're now inside of React. And so this is a JSX file. That's the only reason it's class name. And then I can write something like font bold. And that actually is now understood because Tailwind is providing all of these automatically. And with my Tailwind extension, we can highlight over it and see CSS that it's actually applying under the hood. So it's no magic here. Tailwind just provided us a font bold class that applies font weight 700. That's all that's happening here. Okay. And then we can go as underline. You can see underline does text decoration underline, and I can do decoration 3 pixels, and that's going to say text decoration thickness is 3 pixels. So the same 3 styles were now just applied in line to my H1 element. Okay. For my divs, if I want the gray background, what we can do, it looks like I wrote this in the wrong file. We'll have to go back to app.css. Class name equals, there you go. All right, so for the div, we had a background that was gray. So I can go background and maybe I choose Slate 400, and we'll get into all these different styles category by category in a second here. So background Slate 400, and then I can put this on the other div as well. And as you can see, I just copied and pasted the class names. And so that could be a lot of copying and pasting. We'll see why that criticism of Tailwind is largely mitigated by using React. So we could make a div list container component and then just repeat that component twice. And so that way we wouldn't have to list those classes twice. So the repetition of Tailwind is mitigated through a component framework like React, and the messiness of having all these classes listed here is mitigated by Tailwind Fold. So if I were to, this is my command for folding it. There you go. If I were to fold these Now I don't have to worry about it. I click off, I don't worry about it. But I'm going to keep them shown just for the purposes of the lecture. Now, I think this extension does automatically fold it for you. You can hide them all in settings and have it be manually switched in the settings for that extension. Okay, and if I go back to the site here and we reload, okay, nothing changed. I didn't save the file. And now we can see that we're beginning to get something that looks roughly the same, and I could continue onward and applying these styles to get it look the same. But what I want to do now is I want to go kind of through the most important classes that Tailwind has to offer. So save this, save that, not worry about any of that. And we can also see that all my CSS is in the same file. I don't care about any other CSS files. I'm never going to look at them. So now with Tailwind and React, not only do I have my HTML and JS in the same file, I have my HTML, JS, and CSS all within just one file, 3 files in one, much nicer. I don't have to keep looking around. If I want to understand the styling of this component, I can just read through it and inline, get a good sense of what is happening with the styling. Okay. So I'm going to clear this out for now, and then we can look at the most important Tailwind classes. So the first is going to be your box model classes. So box model referring to things like margin, padding, and border. Tailwind provides lots of classes to do that. For example, if we look at class name, by the way, if you look at class name, you get this pop-up because the Tailwind extension, and you can scroll through all of the many Tailwind classes that this library provides. So we can see that we can have padding and borders. And so it essentially provides things like border 2, which is going to make border width 2, border 4, border width 4, border 8, border width 8 pixels. Okay, we could also do border T8. Now it's just the border top width. Okay, and if we do border B, it's the border bottom width. So we can now change the whole border or just a certain side of the border and have it a certain pixel amount as we like. If I go back and write border B, we see 0, 2, and 8 pixels are what it provides. Now, if I wanted different amounts of pixels than 0, 2, 4, or 8, I can actually use brackets to escape whatever I want. And so I can write the actual amount that I want in brackets, and now it does 3 pixels. So even though it provides a certain subset of sizes that it recommends using, you can escape that very easily and not fight the framework and do what you want right in line there, because it understands that people are going to want to use their own pixel sizes. For padding and margin, it calls padding and margin P and M respectively. So we can go like PT2. PT2 is padding top. Okay. MR3, that's margin right, is size 3. Now, size 3 is not 3 pixels, it's actually 12 pixels. And that's because Tailwind's numbers are a scale. Okay. And that scale at first goes in increments of 4 pixels, and then those increments sort of increase as you get higher up. But the point of using these numbers is that I can just replace these numbers, and they've pre-calculated a scale of sizes that they would recommend sizing with for maximum visual professionalism of the visuals of your site. All right. And Roger, I see you're saying, what if you wanted view width or view height? So let's see if they have something for, I think, so if we wanted the size of this, we can go start typing width. So like width full would give me, actually, I think it's W full, is going to give me the full width. I wonder then if there is something built in here with width. There's full screen, min, max, and fit. I don't immediately see an option for view width. I'm guessing that you could probably do like 2 view height, for example, if you wanted view height. So I don't think it's just pixels. I think you can escape to whatever unit you want. And that's probably how you would go that. And looks like, yes, it is understanding this. We can see through the highlight. Also, that says if it does not understand what you're saying, it will not show up with a little tooltip here. So that can be a nice indication immediately if it knows what you're doing. All right, so that's widths, heights, could be like H full. And so we have things like W for width, H for height, P for padding, M for margin, and full border for border. That's going to get you some quick sizing and box model styling. Okay. So for example, if I want to make a button, and we want to practice this real quick. I can apply some classes, and let's say we want a really wide button. So I can go like PX7, that's going to do the padding. Now PX does left and right, and PY does top and bottom. Okay, so PX7 is going to give me left and right paddings of 28 pixels. And then I can do something like PY1, and maybe I want to give it a border of 3 pixels. And so now border 3 pixels, padding top and padding bottom, 4 pixels, padding left, padding right, 28 pixels, save the file, go back to Chrome, and we get a button here, which has the specified paddings and borders just like that. With a little bit of practice, I think you can see that because you didn't go to any other CSS file, you didn't have to come up with some semantic class name, you just typed it in line, that the shorthands for these different properties can get very quick to write, and you can make your styling sort of on the fly. All right. So next up is going to be positioning, and this is where we get things like flex boxes. So positioning, there's a few different types of positioning. Again, it's all built in CSS, so you should be relatively familiar. For position, we can do position absolute, and now it's positioned absolutely. We can do fixed, now it's positioned fixed. We can do relative, all just writing it like that, and it's now has these specific positions. All right, and we can also do CSS grid if you're familiar with that, and then flex boxes, which I know you all should be familiar with as well. And this is where flex boxes become a lot more nicer to work with. If I want, say I had a few buttons here and we want to visualize flex box, then I'm going to make a div, and then I can just say class name flex, and now this is a flex container. And if I say flex row, this is now a flex container where it's row directional. And then if I wanted wrap, I could just do flex wrap. And if I wanted to justify the items, I can just do any of these justification items. Maybe I want justify center, and maybe I want items is going to be along the cross axis. So maybe I want items center as well. And then I want this div to be width full, so it extends across the entire screen. Now I can save this file, go back to Chrome, and we have these 3 buttons here, all in the center of our screen here, in the center of our div. Just like that, real quick. Okay. So that is a quick way that we can apply flex boxes, and you will probably be doing a lot of flex boxes. So some other stuff you can do is gap X4, for example. That's going to be the gap, the vertical gap between items in a row, and then gap Y. You can do something like gap Y2. That's going to be the horizontal gap between items in a column. Okay, next up is going to be colors. So color schemes. Color schemes are not necessarily easy. Generally, you can use a site to come up with a color scheme for you, but also that generally just gives you the hue, maybe not the brightness that you need. Maybe you need to vary the brightness. So Tailwind makes color schemes a whole lot easier. So if I, for instance, make a div here and want it to have a certain background color, let's look at background. Doesn't show up there. We can look at all of the colors it provides. So many, 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 many colors are provided here. And essentially how Tailwind colors work is they come on a scale. They go what you're selecting, such as background or text or border, for example. And that's the BG here. Dash the base color or hue that you're looking at, like slate or gray or zinc, or amber, orange, yellow, lime, whatever you name it, and then dash the brightness. Brightness comes 50, and then every increment of 100 from 100 to 900, and then 950. That is all the brightnesses it provides. You can see that it gives you a nice scale from very light to very dark for all of these colors. So if I wanted a site that was in red, for example, maybe my base color is background red 400, but I need a lighter one. I can just go lighter on the scale. I need a darker one. I can just go darker on the scale. So it's very easy to make a consistent color scheme with consistent hues and just go up and down that scale. And because it provides so many colors, generally, I'm totally satisfied with the colors that Tailwind itself is providing. So the days of going to Chrome and using a color picker and figuring out the hex codes for the colors that you need are no longer necessary with Tailwind. Okay. So if I go background teal 300, now I got 300. Okay. And I'm going to say with full, put some content in here, save it, back to Chrome. Now I have my background. Perfect. Okay. And I see Michael's talking about vertically centering. If you want to vertically and horizontally center, things are very easy with Tailwind for centering divs. If I go widthful and heightful, then what I can do is I could say like, maybe I need a handful of things here. 2, 3, I'm going to go gap X3. I'm going to go justify center, and then this won't quite work. And so you'll see that it's actually should not be vertically centered, and it's not. Okay, I think I need to put flex row. And it's not vertically centered yet, but that's not because the div is broken. It's because the body itself only assumes the height of its content. So if we go to our index.html and we go to our body, I can apply some Tailwind here as well, and I can just go height full. Now the body has a height of 100%, and I can, that not work. So height full is not applying there. Let's see.
Didn't you have it only take into account JS, JSX files, TS files?
However, yeah, that's true, but it also looks at index.html.
Oh, okay.
What are you trying to do?
Just making the body extend to the full height of the container. Oh, I think maybe this div doesn't either. Maybe I can go class height.
You didn't set the height of the container, correct? Like, so where you set the full, you didn't put height.
Did I think I specified height full here.
Oh, you did.
Height full. So not quite sure what's going on with the heightful on the body here. If I give it a height of 300 pixels, let's see if that's going to work, at least to give me something as a demonstration. It's not even applying. Okay. We'll just go for right now. What we'll do is I'm just going to give this as height 300 px, and I'm just going to go with that's not doing anything either. Okay.
Does the blank div, you know, the empty brackets that we have in the return app right there, is that where the class probably belongs?
So the blank fragment doesn't show up in the final HTML tree. If we inspect, we can see that you actually won't see that anywhere here. So it's just used by React to understand your code, but it doesn't actually show up in the final tree. 300. See, it's these two which I'm looking to make look a little bit better. Let's just say if I can do fixed to remove it from the flow. Maybe, nope. Okay. Well then, we'll have to look at this later. I would like to move on for now. But there is a way of getting that working. I think something is going on with how the body's height is restricting our movement of its child. Okay, so the next topic, which is very, very key to more complex Tailwind features, is called pseudo classes. So we know we've actually seen pseudo classes before in index in like a styles file. This was something like hover, like as in or if like H1, was it listed after or before? I don't quite remember, but like maybe it looks like it's after in plain CSS. So this is now only applying when our H1 is hovered. That is what we call a pseudo class, because it is this H1 element in this made up class of being hovered, which is defined by the browser. So we can actually do things in pseudo classes in Tailwind as well. So for a button, if I go back to having a button here and I go class name equals background teal 200, border 2, border teal 400, and then if we look at that, we get this button, but when I'm hovering, it's not doing anything. Well, what I can do is I can just go hover : background teal 400. Now the background teal 200 is what's applying in the normal case, but when we're hovered, we're going to go background teal 400. So just like that, by appending hover : beforehand, we can have this class apply only in that case. I reload here, we are getting that hover effect. There are many pseudo classes that exist, and they support a variety of features. I wonder if I can get it too. So we can see, let's see. So for example, first would be like the first child. Focus would be if it's focused. Active if the link is actively being clicked. Checked if a checkbox is checked, and so on. Required, optional, disabled. There's all sorts of different pseudo classes here, and there's some more complex ones that I'd like to go into now. Another feature you might want to add is media queries. So with CSS, if you don't remember, a media query is used to make your site responsive to different screen sizes. And so like a medium screen size might have a different text size than a really small screen versus a really large screen. Or maybe you have, so for example, if we take Don's D&D project, if on his like PDF page that we saw on a normal size screen, it would make a lot of sense to visualize it like that. If someone's looking at a smartphone, we probably don't want to shrink that down. There are ways that we could actually change it so that the way things are organized on the screen changes based on the screen size. So we can use media queries to inspect dynamically what the screen size is and respond to that accordingly. In CSS, you had to use sort of a syntax you would look up when needed if you didn't use it enough for media queries, and it's a little complex, but in Tailwind, we can just use this sort of pseudo class-like concept. So I can say text large to make my text size large for this button, but I can say if I'm on a really, and essentially how it works is Tailwind provides pseudo classes like small, medium, large, extra large, and 2 extra large. And what it means is any screen width at that point and above, this will apply. So if I do text large, that's my base size. This always applies. But if I then go large and text 3XL, now this text size of 3XL will only apply when our min width is 1024 pixels. And we can see here the media query that it's making underlying this is when we hit this minimum width, then we will start to get this larger font size as opposed to the smaller one. So back to Chrome, we can see that big button. If I shrink this down, small, and then I hit that minimum width, and it's large again. So just like that, we can have responsive designs without having to write more complex media queries in line for our styles. The next topic to discuss is peers and groups. So let's consider if we looked back at this list item div, we can see here that we have a variety of P's and then we have a div object. Well, we could think of this div as a grouping that contains these paragraphs. And then these paragraphs are siblings of each other. So what if I wanted to style things relative to their siblings or relative to their parent? I can use something called group and peer. So if I mark this div as group, then what I can do here in its children class names is I can say group. A second. So when you first type it in, sometimes it won't give you the tooltip. So I usually just type a space and then it activates the tooltip. It's a weird bug with the extension. I can now see all of these pseudo classes I can apply. So group first, group last, group odd, group even, all these sorts of things based on the group state. And so that will let me apply different stylings based on what's happening with the group. So for example, if the group is hovered, then I can apply background line 300. But otherwise that wouldn't be applied. And I can even make this P appear. And then this other P that goes below it can use peers. And then it can say peer hovered, for example, we could do something. So you can essentially style dynamically based on the status of your siblings or of your parent container using these peer and group pseudo classes. A great example of this is making a tooltip. So we saw there with those tooltips that would pop up for the styles that Tailwind understood, we could make those tooltips on our site pretty easily using this peer and group idea. So if I make a button, I can click here, and I could say class name equals peer. Then I can make under it, I could make some paragraph that is going to be if this is the tooltip, then if I only want this tooltip to show up when we are actually hovering over the button, then what I can do is I can make it normally invisible, but when the peer is hovered, I can make it visible. So now it's invisible until our peer is hovered. Okay. So if I go back here, now when I hover over the button, I start to see the tooltip. And if we make the tooltip, maybe it's instead of being in the real flow of the app, we could make it positioned relative or absolutely to this button. You could make tooltips appear on top of other elements, just like they are in Tailwind here. This is appearing on top of my code. You could do that as well, just by positioning it absolutely relative to the peer that it's being a tooltip for. Okay, so I could do background white. I'm going to, just for clarity, I'm going to give this a background teal 500. And then I'm going to put these in there. And what I would like to do is say that we could position this, could actually have this be hidden. And then see, we'll go invisible. And then I'm going to say peer hover visible and background white. When we see that, now it's white on top of the teal, so you can see it's popping up there. But if we want it actually to pop out, we can change it so that it is actually positioned absolute to relative to this div parent, which we can make relative so that we can be absolute relative to that div. And we can say like right 0, top, I don't know, 100 pixels, and this would be width fit, and I'm going to go here and reload. All right, so not right 0, but left 0, and now I see, okay, let me have this, give this height. Let's just give this a height like 1000 pixels just for show here. Now I have a tooltip that is appearing on top of my background. And I could play around with how far I set the offset, as I just used it 100 pixels here, but I could play around with where exactly I wanted that tooltip to appear, but we get it appearing on top of everything else, and we can just quickly add tooltips to our site elements. Okay. So now everyone's favorite, dark mode. Dark mode is actually made very easy with Tailwind. So Tailwind supports dark mode using something called the dark. And it didn't show up there, but see, dark. Now, what that means is maybe we want to go background black when it's dark. And this won't work right now, because we have to switch one setting first. But essentially what this means is your stylings will apply in light mode. And if you append them with dark, then the dark mode will apply. And so now we can have separate colors for our light modes and dark modes for each element to really quickly implement a dark mode for our site. Now, how Tailwind knows whether we're in dark mode or not is based on the HTML element. If we go to the index.html, this element, its class right now is empty. But if we put class dark, then Tailwind should know that we're in dark mode, which it's not. Let's see here. It's not quite understanding that, I wonder if I rename HTML, that's going to fix anything. Nope. Oh, man. Oh, okay. I also need to switch the setting. One setting needs to be changed to enable dark mode. In Tailwind, config.js, add an entry called module. Actually, no. All that. Okay. Add this line, dark mode class. When you add that line, it should understand dark mode. So, boom, dark mode. Because I added dark mode class to my export default in tailwind.config.js, Tailwind now is, what that says is, Tailwind, I want you to enable dark mode when the class dark exists on HTML. I want you to not have dark mode when that class is absent. So what we can do is, to enable dark mode, is for our styles, we'll just append dark to anything that we want dark mode on. And then we could have something that is going to enable or disable dark mode. So for example, if I make a button here, and this is going to be toggle dark mode, then I can say class name, we can give it text black for light mode. We can give it dark text white for dark mode so that we can see it in both cases. I'm going to give it sort of a background color that can be seen in both cases. And then what I would like to do is have its on click be something that's going to set dark mode. So our on click will be a function that is going to set dark mode. So I can grab that HTML element by doing document.getElement by tag name HTML. That's going to give me a list, but I just want the first item. Okay, and that's my HTML element. I know there's only going to be one by the tag HTML, or there at least should only be one. And then I can go set attribute, which is used to, and then I can set the class attribute to dark or light. Now, how do I know whether it's dark or light? Then I can just say HTML element dot get attribute class triple equals dark. Then I want to set to light mode. Else set dark mode. Okay, so this is a bit long of a line, but what this is saying is I first on line 24 retrieve my HTML element, then I grab its class. Is it dark? I want to set that class to light. If it's not dark, I'll assume it's light and I'll set it to dark. So what this button does is when I click it, it enables or disables dark mode. Okay. And theoretically, I should be able to go with class here, and I should be able to go background white, and in dark mode, background black to enable dark mode. So now this is not quite updating. I didn't save app.jsx. Now, when I toggle dark mode, it is toggling these settings, and now I have a button that is changing whether I'm using dark mode, so that people like Eric and myself can use light mode and then provide dark mode so that people will actually use our websites. Okay. So the final thing I want to talk about here, and we're almost done, is, as I know we're at the hour, the final thing is, how does Tailwind pair with React? And I just want to talk about that for a second here. We've been doing everything inside of app, but if I wanted this styling for specific elements on my page, then React components pair really well with Tailwind classes. Because when I'm defining a component, in this case app, but any of my others, and I write these classes inline for the HTML elements of that specific React component, that means there's a single source of truth, because I just need to change the styling in this one component in order to change it every time that component is used throughout my app. And that minimizes the code repetition that we'd have and the copying and pasting of those classes. So I highly recommend using Tailwind with a component framework like React. The second thing is that because React combines JS and HTML, and Tailwind combines JS and CSS, that means that CSS and JS are effectively combined when we use Tailwind with React. What that means is we can use conditional styling. We can do something like, if I had a state variable here, const on set on equals use state, and that's going to be true essentially. And then if I make my on click set on to not on as well, then that's going to set state. And then what I can do is maybe I have a paragraph element that says, well, I'll want it to say on. I'll go on versus off. I want to give it the same text styling. And essentially, if dark mode is on, maybe I want this background to be green. And if it's off, maybe I want it to be red. I can make this, because this is JavaScript, I can make this a formatted string or a template literal, and then just have conditionally apply these classes. So what is it confused about right now? I need to escape this. That's why. Okay. So then I can basically say on, then use background green 100, off, use background red. So now I'm conditionally applying green versus a red background because I'm inside of JS. I can write CSS inside of JS. So now I have conditionally applied CSS classes. So dark mode, we can see, and that green color is hard to see on there, but you can see that its background color of that on versus off text is changing conditionally. So with that, that's all I aimed to cover in this lecture. We've seen how to implement Tailwind with our React and Vue projects and a variety of different classes you can apply and how we can leverage its pseudo class concept to conditionally apply styles, and then also leverage the fact that we're using React with Tailwind to use conditional styling on our classes. And so essentially, you can now put everything in one file, write your styling inline so you can clearly see what is applying to what. You can apply it conditionally and easily implement more complex features like dark mode that use conditional logic. And I think through time and practice with this, you'll be able to quickly get up to speed with it, because it really is just plain CSS with a nicer syntax. And you'll get to the point where you're styling things as you go instead of making your site and doing styling secondary after the fact, because you want to avoid it as it's tough and difficult and you have to use these different CSS files. You'll get to the point where you're just doing it as you go. So you can essentially get something up and running with at least a decent style inline as you're writing your components. So it's not a secondary thought. It's instead integrated directly with the development workflow for React. And that's all I got for you. So thank you for listening.
Hey, thanks a lot for the